In the fall of 2008, more than 300 scientists calculated what a major earthquake would do to Southern California.
We've been conducting a special study of a magnitude 7.8 earthquake on the southern San Andreas Fault, large enough to potentially damage tall buildings. Fire will be very significant.
The definitive scientific report presented to politicians was codenamed Shakeout. It forecast thousands of deaths and billions of dollars of damage in the city of Los Angeles, which makes it crucial to investigate the most important question: when will the next big earthquake hit the San Andreas Fault? The latest preparations for disaster are the climax of an investigation that started more than 100 years ago. In the aftermath of the Great San Francisco earthquake of 1906. The earthquake struck on a Wednesday, just before dawn. The ground shook violently for 45 seconds, igniting fires that raged unchecked for the next 4 days. "28,000 buildings, a tenth of the entire city, were destroyed, and more than 3,000 people, 1 in every 100 of the population, were killed. With a magnitude of 7.8, it's in the top 20 of North America's strongest ever earthquakes. The scale of the Great San Francisco earthquake shocked the nation. But no one understood what had made the city shake. Native American myths explained earthquakes as shocks from a battle between warring spirits. Latter-day explorers couldn't understand the shocks that destroyed their mission buildings. One Spanish missionary wrote, "The earth shook around me from explosions under the ground." 300 years later, and science has still made little progress. Refugees in the ruins of San Francisco still blamed earthquakes on mysterious underground explosions. So, just 3 days after the earthquake, the state of California asked one of the world's most famous geologists, Andrew Lawson from California State University, to investigate what had destroyed the city. He and a team of 25 scientists began collecting damage evidence in the city and surrounding countryside. There were roads that had buckled, rail tracks that had twisted. The most startling evidence of all? That came near the town of Bolinas in Marin County, to the north of San Francisco. This picket fence had an 8-foot gap in the middle. Before the earthquake, it was a solid boundary fence dividing 2 fields. But when he recreated what had happened, Lawson realized that the land had jolted apart and torn the fence in 2. Plotting the evidence on a map around San Francisco revealed a surprising pattern. Because connecting the dots drew a straight line. And at every point, the earth moved in the same way, on the coast to the north, inland to the south. This line of weakness was the culprit they were searching for. South of San Francisco, the suspect line ran underneath a lake, the Laguna de San Andreas. So now, the earthquake perpetrator at last had a name. Professor Lawson, who a decade earlier had identified cracks in the earth here as a harmless rift, now rechristened it the San Andreas Fault. In modern-day San Francisco, the buildings, the roads, and the railways have long since been repaired. But if you know where to look, evidence of the 1906 quake can still be found. Geologist Charlie Paul follows in the footsteps of Lawson's team, seeking signs of the havoc from 1906. He finds it on the cliffs at Muscle Rock, 12 miles south of San Francisco.
The cliff is not here by accident. There's a very good reason why this cliff is here. Half a mile or so of the shore face apparently fell off in the 1906 earthquake. And if you look down below us, there's a big rotated block that's near the present-day shoreline. And it is just inboard of the San Andreas Fault. The San Andreas Fault is about a quarter of a mile offshore here, and of course that's one of the major crustal junctions on this side of North America.
Modern computers can now trace how damage waves spread out across the city, and that pinpoints where the quake originated along the San Andreas. It was offshore, about 2 miles out to sea from the Golden Gate Bridge. So, to continue tracking the fault, the investigation must head out to sea. Marine geologists use remote operating vehicles, mini submarines, to map the seafloor.
What you'd see is subtle variations in the topography, or topography that would not naturally line up. So there might be a line on the ocean floor that is higher or lower on one side, and you can use various techniques to determine that this actually is a fault instead of some other process.
Running south across the seabed, the San Andreas finally runs out of ocean and hits the land. This broken line of rocks, stretching in from the sea, marks where the San Andreas hits land 12 miles south of San Francisco.
And we're here at Muscle Rock, and we're essentially standing on the San Andreas Fault right now. And if there was an earthquake, I don't know what would happen right here, but I wouldn't want to be here.
This Pacific coastline, where cliffs crumble slowly into the sea, is the boundary between two of the Earth's massive continental plates. Separated by the San Andreas Fault, two vast separate blocks of the Earth's crust lie directly alongside each other. Here, the continent of North America lies slightly on top of the adjacent section of crust which holds the Pacific Ocean. The join can be seen where these lower, darker rocks are overlaid by light-colored sedimentary rocks.
These rock types differ by more than 100 million years in age. Two rock bodies that are not similar in any way have been brought together.
The fault line was exposed to geologists when the cliffs collapsed here in the 1906 earthquake. But back then, nobody understood how and why the two different types of rock were next to each other. Until around 40 years ago, when the answer was finally revealed by the theory of plate tectonics. The theory showed that the Earth's crust consists of separate moving plates on which the oceans and continents sit. Around 200 million years ago, the heavy Pacific Ocean plate collided with North America and started sinking underneath the lighter continent. Professor of Geophysics Mark Zoback studies that process, called subduction, in his laboratory at Stanford University.
For many millions of years, prior to the existence of the San Andreas Fault, the Pacific plate was subducting beneath North America. The oceanic plate was diving down, and that process went on for, well over 100 million years. So a tremendous amount of activity was occurring.
As the unstoppable force of one plate met the immovable object of the other, they were forced to change direction.
About 20 million years ago, the plate motions were such that the Pacific plate had to start sliding north with respect to North America. And now, the principal motion is this sliding process between the two plates. And 20 million years ago, the San Andreas Fault was born.
Hidden deep beneath the waves of the Western Pacific lies the Marianas Trench, the deepest point of all the oceans. The first step on the journey of what created this mysterious scar in the Earth's crust and how it continues to mold the planet takes us back to 1872, when a British research vessel, HMS Challenger, set out on the first ever mission to map the ocean floor.
Throughout most of recorded history, men had just assumed that beyond a certain level the sea was pretty flat, pretty dead, fairly lifeless. They weren't expecting to find anything very interesting.
For 4 years, the Challenger crisscrossed the oceans, covering 70,000 miles, a third of the distance to the moon. The crew plumbed the depths every 140 miles, using a total of 249 miles of rope and hundreds of pounds of lead weight. It was tedious, backbreaking work, but at the time it was the only way to measure the depth of the ocean floor. When they got to the Western Pacific, 200 miles off the island of Guam, the crew routinely lowered the rope for a measurement. But the weight kept on dropping and dropping.
It's a big surprise. Nobody thought the ocean was this deep. So all of a sudden we've got scientists saying, why is that?
Eventually, the weight struck the bottom at 4,475 fathoms, nearly 5 miles beneath the ocean's surface.
The scientists would be going, wow, we've found something, and what does it mean? Is it a little hole? Is it a big hole? What kind of feature is it down there? There's a whole lot of questions you get when you find this one spectacular reading.
The Challenger expedition marked the birth of modern oceanography and provided the first crude map of the ocean floor. It showed how the ocean floor gently slopes away from the land and then plummets thousands of feet into vast flat plains. But the Western Pacific is different. It drops off again into the 5-mile deep hole, a hole that blew right out of the water the long-held belief that the sea floor was flat and featureless. And it spawned a mystery, because nobody could understand how this strange underwater feature came about. It would be 75 years before any answers emerged. It took a revolutionary new technology, sonar, to push the investigation forward to the next crucial stage. Sonar was first developed in the early 1900s and then perfected during the 1940s to detect submarines lurking in the deep. The system works by pumping sound waves through the water. The waves bounce off solid objects and are reflected back to a detector. By measuring the time it takes for the sound waves to bounce back, scientists realized they could build a remarkably accurate picture of the world beneath the waves.
The world's major navies spend a lot of time and effort developing submarine hunting technology. Then the hydrographers discover that you can use this to chart the bottom of the sea. And it's an awful lot cheaper and easier than using large numbers of sailors pulling on ropes.
In 1951, a British Navy research ship returned to the deep hole found by the Challenger expedition. But this time, they were armed with sophisticated new sonar equipment. And the results were amazing. Detailed sonar maps revealed that the deep hole in the Pacific Ocean floor isn't a hole at all, but part of a massive trench, 30 times deeper than the Empire State Building is high. It runs twice the length of California, 1,500 miles from the southeast of Guam to the northwest of the Mariana Islands.
People were probably astounded by what they were seeing because clearly the ocean floor had enormous changes in relief, was very mountainous in some places, had great deeps in other places. To a geologist, this would be extremely exciting.
Even within the trench itself, there are remarkable variations. At its southern end lies the greatest surprise of all. The seafloor drops down another 2 miles to its lowest point, a staggering 7 miles beneath the waves. Scientists had discovered the deepest part of the oceans. Even today, it is the lowest known point on the planet. They named this part of the trench the Challenger Deep, in honor of the ship that discovered it.
To get a sense of just how deep trenches are, if we take the height of Mount Everest, we would still have about a mile of water above us before we get to the ocean's surface.
But how the Marianas Trench was formed remained a mystery. Investigators decided the best way to find the answer was to dive to the bottom of the trench, to see for themselves the lowest point on the planet, the Challenger Deep. But they faced a major problem. At the bottom of the trench, they would have to contend with pressure 1,000 times stronger than at the surface. That's the equivalent of being squeezed on all sides by the weight of 50 jumbo jets. To demonstrate the effects of such pressure, scientists use a dummy head.
Today what we're going to do is actually put one of these styrofoam wig heads in the pressure chamber and expose it to the pressure we would see in the Marianas Trench. That's about 16,000 psi.
A human skull would be crushed to a pulp, but the rubbery head will only have all the air squeezed out.
Wow, that's smaller. And here's what the original size was, just for comparison. Quite dramatic. Pretty stark difference between something that hasn't been 7 miles deep in the ocean and something that has. Glad I'm not going there. At the Mariana Trench, human life is impossible. We're not equipped to resist those kinds of pressures. And so it's necessary to protect humans from that type of an environment.
The challenge to engineers was how to accomplish this. In 1953, Swiss scientist Auguste Piccard designed the Trieste, a pioneering vehicle that could withstand the crushing pressures. The submersible was dominated by a 50-foot-long hull, filled with light aviation gasoline and lead weights to control buoyancy. Slung underneath it was a tiny 6-foot spherical cabin with 5-inch thick steel walls. Finally, after 7 years of modifications and manned test dives no deeper than 3.5 miles, the Trieste was ready to attempt the 7 miles to the bottom of the trench. The commander of this perilous undertaking was U.S. Navy Lieutenant and deep-sea explorer Don Walsh.
I know the astronauts that go through this all the time. Why do you have to be there? Why can't we just put up a robot to do things? We've got to be there because that's what we do.
Only a few officers and scientists knew about the risky mission, which was launched in January 1960 from the western Pacific island of Guam.
Guam, in those days, was kind of a backwater. It was just right for us because we were trying to do this project sort of out of sight because we weren't too sure it was going to work. The Navy just didn't want to be embarrassed by a failed science spectacular.
Accompanying Walsh was the son of the Trieste designer, engineer and oceanographer Jacques Piccard. The two men would spend the next 9 hours squeezed inside the cramped sphere.
And we had 20 cubic feet of space inside. That's about the same as a household refrigerator. and the temperature was almost that cold inside. It was a drama.
At a speed of just 3 miles per hour, they began their slow descent into the twilight zone. By 3,000 feet, the darkness was total. The only illumination was from the Trieste's powerful lights.
The depths we were operating at, it was always black. The only thing that lit up the abyss was the bioluminescence from animals and plankton. Like fireflies, they carry their own light sources with them.
Encased in their 5-inch thick steel sphere, Walsh and Piccard quickly passed their test dive record of 18,000 feet. Everything appeared to be going to plan. At the rear of the cabin, the crew were protected by a double layer of glass. But 2 hours into the dive, the outer pane cracked.
We had a great big bang. We didn't know what it was. We were about 20,000 feet, and we looked around and checked everything.
Every square inch of their tiny life-supporting capsule was fighting back 8 tons of pressure. With the outer pane broken, the only thing between the men and instant death was a single pane of glass.
If the inner window had cracked, we would have been instantly dead, maybe even before we knew it.
But incredibly, the inner pane remained watertight. Walsh and Piccard decided to continue the descent. After a tense, claustrophobic 4 hours and 48 minutes, they approached the bottom of the trench, only to be startled by movement on the sea floor.
Just before we landed, we saw a flatfish, about 1 foot long. And that's a bottom-dwelling fish, so if you see one, there are others.
Nobody expected to see life at these crushing depths, but it meant the explorers had reached their goal. The very bottom of the Marianas Trench. The depth gauge, with a reading of 35,800 feet, nearly 7 miles below the surface, confirmed the sonar findings. Squeezed inside their bubble of breathable air, the 2 explorers were closer to the Earth's center than man had ever been.
We took a self-portrait. That's the picture that you see. We said we're going to do it, and we did it.
But there was work to be done. Walsh and Piccard wanted to make detailed observations of the enormous trench. Unfortunately, the Trieste stirred up a cloud of fine, powdery sediment from the sea floor that obscured their view.
It's like being in a bowl of milk at that point. So, realizing we weren't going to see anything, we decided to go on back up to the surface.
Off the island of Guam, the Trieste surfaces after a descent into the Marianas Trench.
After 9 grueling hours underwater, Walsh and Piccard returned to the surface on January 23, 1960, and officially entered the record books for the deepest dive of all time. To this day, their extraordinary feat has never been repeated.